Sign it, right now, in front of everyone. Claudio Veri thrust a tablet into Nadia Ferraro's hands, his voice slicing through the gentle clink of cutlery on the rooftop terrace of Ristorante Aurelia. Conversations at surrounding tables dwindled into hush. Nadia's cheeks burned under the searing glare of her manager, but her spine remained straight. She glanced down at the tablet's screen, a resignation letter, already drafted with her name on it. A lie waiting for her signature. Nadia's fingers trembled just slightly as she held the tablet. Still, she kept her voice steady and soft. "Fire me if you want," she said, meeting Claudio's eyes with calm defiance. "I won't sign a lie." The words came out quietly, but each one was clear. A few of the lunch patrons gasped softly. In the corner of her eye, Nadia saw an older bartender flinch. He had paused mid-polish of a wine glass to witness the confrontation. Everyone had. The terrace's lush decor, potted olive trees, white tablecloths, the distant view of Milan's fashion district skyline, faded into the background. All Nadia could focus on was the tablet in her grip, and Claudio's sneer looming above it. Claudio's lips pulled back in a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. He took a single step closer, towering over her. "Nadia," he said in a tone that was almost paternal, but loud enough for all to hear, "this will go much easier for you if you cooperate." He tapped the tablet's screen with a blunt finger, right where the digital signature line glowed. "Sign it." The older bartender, standing near the marble bar, swallowed hard. He was a gentleman who had worked at Aurelia for years. Under his breath, barely audible, he urged, "Just sign it, please." Nadia's heart ached at the pleading in his whisper. He knew her situation, rent due tonight, the family back home in Calabria counting on her income, and he understood what losing this job would mean. Nadia's eyes flickered toward him. The older bartender gave a tiny shake of his head, silently begging her to relent for her own sake. Claudio caught the exchange and barked sharply, "Back to work now." The older bartender jolted and returned his trembling hands to the glassware. The manager's gaze swung back to Nadia. He leaned in so close she could smell the expensive espresso on his breath. "Don't test me," he said softly, words made only for her. "You think anyone here will save you? They're all my witnesses." Nadia's pulse pounded, but her expression remained composed, chin lifted at a proud angle. She felt dozens of eyes pressing on her. Diners, co-workers, all frozen in anticipation. A breeze swept over the terrace, rustling the parasols and bringing a hint of the late afternoon sun on her face. But Nadia felt cold. She inhaled slowly. "I have done nothing wrong," she replied, voice still calm, but now carrying a clear note of finality. Her fingers gently pushed the tablet back toward Claudio's chest. "I won't sign that." A hush fell. The only sounds were a distant clatter of a dish from the kitchen below, and the muted din of city traffic far beneath the rooftop. Claudio's face turned a blotchy red. For a second, Nadia wondered if he might truly fire her on the spot, or cause an even uglier scene. Her stomach twisted at the thought of her paycheck disappearing, her grandparents' bills unpaid, her little brother's textbooks not bought. But there was no way she would sign a confession to mistakes she never made. Soft voice, steel spine, that was how her mother always described her. Now, under Claudio's wrathful stare, she embodied it. Claudio straightened up and addressed the onlookers now. His voice regained its performative boom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "you have just witnessed an unfortunate display of insubordination." He took the tablet from Nadia with a flourish, as if showing evidence of a crime. "This employee refuses to acknowledge her misconduct. After this table's service, she will be done at Aurelia." A murmur rippled through the guests. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others raised their phones, discreetly recording behind wine glasses. A sharp sting pricked Nadia's eyes, but she blinked it away, refusing to let tears betray her. Claudio paced dramatically, ensuring every table heard him. "In the hospitality industry," he proclaimed, "there is no room for those who won't own up to their failures. We maintain the highest standards at Ristorante Aurelia." He cast a derisive look back at Nadia. "And I have zero tolerance for staff who lie to my face." Nadia's nails bit into her palms. Every word was a needle, calculated to puncture her reputation. She opened her mouth to protest, to defend herself in some way. But Claudio didn't give her the chance. "Perhaps you all should know," Claudio continued, voice dripping with feigned regret. "This is not the first issue we've had with Miss Ferraro's performance." He turned to her with a sneer only she could see. "Isn't that right, Nadia?" A wave of humiliation crashed over her. She felt her face grow hot, but but fought to keep her breathing steady. "That's not true," she said quietly. Claudio ignored her. "If anyone cares to dine at establishments where honesty and diligence are optional," he declared to the terrace, "I can recommend plenty of other restaurants in Milan, but under my management, no deception goes unanswered." Nadia clenched her jaw. The injustice of his words churned in her gut. She had always worked hard, arriving early for every shift, taking double shifts when others called out, treating even the rudest customers with grace. She thought of the content of that resignation letter. No doubt it was full of fabricated infractions. The idea of everyone believing she had been incompetent or dishonest was almost too much to bear. Yet no one spoke up for her. The well-heeled patrons in designer suits and elegant dresses averted their gazes when her eyes flicked hopefully over them. The other waiters and staff stood like statues, clearly terrified for their own jobs. In Milan's high-end restaurant circuit, Claudio Veri's word could make or break you. He had connections at every venue from the Galleria to the Duomo's shadow. If he blacklisted her, Nadia knew she might never work in a respectable restaurant in the city again. As Claudio basked in the silence, he gave a satisfied nod, as if the matter were settled. He pivoted sharply and strode back into the restaurant's interior hallway that led from the terrace, leaving Nadia to endure the judgmental or pitying looks alone. For a moment she simply stood rooted to the mosaic tile floor, trying to gather the shattered pieces of her dignity. Then, chest tight, she turned on autopilot toward the service station. Her shift wasn't even over yet. She still had one last table to attend, Claudio's final command to finish serving the party at table 9 before being cast out. The injustice of it made her feel faint. Done after this table. Each step felt like it echoed those words. As Nadia moved towards the kitchen's swinging door, her foot caught on something, and she stumbled a half step. Steadying herself on the wall, she found herself near the office door. The small manager's office just off the terrace corridor, the door ajar. Inside, she noticed something unusual on Claudio's desk. A thick manila folder stamped with red block letters that read, "Cellar Log." Beside it lay a brass key glinting under the fluorescent office light. Before she could take in more, a hand slammed the door shut from inside. Nadia jumped back, heart thudding. Through the now closed door, she heard a rustling and a muffled curse. Claudio's voice. He must have realized she'd seen inside. For a split second as the door was swinging shut, she had glimpsed his face. And what she saw wasn't anger or irritation. It was panic. Real, unmistakable panic. Nadia backed away, confused. The cellar log. As far as she knew, that was just inventory sheets for the restaurant's prized wine cellar. Why would Claudio react so strongly to her seeing a folder? And that key, was it for the cellar? A prickle of unease crept down her spine, but she had no time to linger. She could already hear Claudio's footsteps heavy on the other side of the door. She hurried back out to the terrace with the water pitcher she had originally been fetching. At table 9, the last table she would ever serve here, a pair of businessmen were obliviously tapping at their phones. Nadia mustered a polite smile and topped off their glasses, hands steady through sheer will. They barely looked up. As she turned to go, a movement by the elevator caught her eye. With a soft chime, the glass elevator doors slid open onto the terrace level. 3 men stepped out, backlit by the golden wash of the late afternoon sun. At the forefront was a tall man in a charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt open at the collar without a tie. His stride was unhurried as he took in the scene with a cool survey. 2 others flanked him. One, broad-shouldered with a neck as thick as a bull's, Nico, Nadia recognized at once. And the other leaner, refined, almost academic in his poise, Lorenzo. Dante Morelli had arrived. A hush fell across the terrace that was even deeper than the earlier silence. It was as though the air itself grew still. A few people nearest the newcomers recognized him at once. A waiter who had been hurrying by froze in his tracks and murmured under his breath, "Morelli," as if naming a ghost. One diner, halfway out of his seat perhaps to leave the awkward atmosphere, slowly sank back down, eyes averted. Nadia's chest tightened. Dante's presence here now set off a storm of emotions inside her. Relief, because she suddenly felt not so alone, and dread, because a confrontation involving him could escalate beyond control. She had hoped to shield her fiancé from this ugly incident at her workplace entirely. She hadn't even told him about Claudio's increasing harassment. Dante had enough burdens, and she wanted to fight her own battles when she could. Yet here he was, radiating a calm that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. He was calm, but she could sense the potential energy coiled beneath that composed exterior. Dante and his 2 companions walked further onto the terrace, their footsteps measured. Nico, the burly one, moved a half-step behind Dante, scanning the area with a silent, hawk-eyed vigilance. Lorenzo's sharp gaze flickered to Nadia just for an instant, checking on her as if she were another asset to guard. Nadia's heart thundered in her ears as Dante's eyes found her. Those eyes, deep-set, dark and steady, betrayed no surprise at what he was seeing. They narrowed slightly at the sight of her obviously distressed stance, at Claudio's absence from her side. Dante's jaw tightened, only for a heartbeat, before his face returned to a mask of measured impassivity. No one looking at him now would guess the fury Nadia knew might be simmering underneath. He was not just another patron. He was the patron that made seasoned chefs stammer and the richest clients whisper in deference. Dante Morelli seldom needed to raise his voice or his hand. The weight of his name and the controlled intensity in his eyes did more than any overt threat could. Nadia swallowed, suddenly hyper-aware of every pair of eyes darting between her and Dante. She quickly cast her gaze down, busying herself with clutching the water pitcher, as if nothing were amiss. "Please don't do this here," her mind begged silently, a plea she hoped he could read in her stance or expression. "Not here, not now." Dante did not say a word. Instead, he inclined his head almost imperceptibly toward her in greeting. Then he turned that same inscrutable stare toward the manager's office door. At that very moment, Claudio emerged from the hallway, straightening his suit jacket, face still flushed from his earlier triumph and that brief scare with the folder. He nearly collided with Dante standing just outside the door. Claudio halted, irritation flashing in his eyes at nearly barreling into a guest. "Mi scusi," he muttered automatically, stepping around Dante without a second glance, clearly not recognizing him. "Watch your step." "Sir," he added brusquely as he pushed past. Dante's only reaction was a slow turn of his head to follow Claudio's path back toward the terrace. His features remained relaxed. But Nadia, who knew him well, saw the subtle shift. Dante's shoulders set just a little squarer, his chin raised an inch higher. It was the posture of a man about to stake a claim. Claudio marched back to the center of the terrace, where a few customers still pretended to focus on their meals. "My apologies for that disturbance, everyone," he called out, smoothing back his hair with a composure that was returning now that he thought the worst was over. "We will handle this matter swiftly and professionally." Nadia stood frozen by table 9, water pitcher in hand, unsure whether to follow him or stay put. The last thing she wanted was another round of humiliation, especially now in front of Dante. She risked a glance Dante's way. He had stepped quietly to one side, near a column, and slipped his phone out of his pocket. With a casual motion, he tapped the screen a couple of times and held it low at his side, camera facing toward the unfolding scene. Nadia realized he was recording everything, quietly gathering proof of Claudio's behavior. A swell of gratitude and admiration hit her. He wasn't storming in with bravado. He was calculating, protecting her in the way that counted. Claudio either didn't notice the subtle move or didn't care, because he continued as though Dante were just another patron to shoo along. "Now, Miss Ferraro," he said, turning to Nadia with a cold smile, "do you have anything to say to our guests before you leave employment here?" Nadia's throat was dry. She opened her mouth, but before she could respond, a quiet voice sliced through the charged air. "If he touches her again, stop it." Dante's words were soft, meant only for Nico at his shoulder, but in the tense silence of the terrace they felt thunderous. For a moment, Nadia's mind flashed back to gentler days. Before all of this, back when Dante was just a familiar patron at her restaurant, rather than a silent guardian at her back. Weeks ago, on a quiet afternoon, Nadia approached a corner table with an espresso in hand. The man seated there looked up from the newspaper spread before him. It was the same man who now commanded the terrace's attention, Dante Morelli, though back then he was simply an elegant stranger, who had become a regular. He visited Aurelia almost every week, thus always requesting a seat on the terrace, always alone. Nadia offered the demi-tasse cup with a polite smile. "Double espresso macchiato, 1 sugar on the side," she said, setting it down exactly as he preferred. Dante arched an eyebrow, a faint surprise crossing his normally impassive face. "You remembered," he murmured. His voice was low and smooth, carrying just a hint of curiosity. "I remember every guest. It's my job, sir," Nadia replied evenly. There was no flirtation in her tone, just professionalism touched with warmth. Her answer was simple fact, though truthfully she remembered him a little more than most, not because of his striking presence or the quiet intensity in his eyes, but because he had been unfailingly polite in all their brief interactions. Unlike other wealthy diners who sometimes barely acknowledged her except to bark orders, Dante had always given her a courteous nod of thanks, a direct look in the eye. Dante regarded her for a long second. Nadia didn't fluster under his gaze. She merely refilled his water glass and asked if he needed anything else. He noted the calm competence in her movements. No extra chatter, no attempt to charm him beyond offering excellent service. As she moved off to tend another table, he continued to watch quietly. At a nearby table, a toddler from a visiting family accidentally knocked over a basket of breadsticks, causing the child's mother to flush with embarrassment. Nadia was there in an instant, kneeling down to gently reassure them in Italian and then English, her soft voice carrying warmth. "No harm at all, signora," she said kindly, as she helped gather the scattered pieces, making the little boy laugh with a quick wink. The tension at that table diffused immediately, replaced by grateful smiles. Dante's lips had curved just slightly at the scene. He realized that what drew him to Nadia was not just her pretty face or grace, it was her quiet authority, the way she handled situations with a steady hand. There was strength in her gentle demeanor. Sitting at his corner table, Dante had lifted the tiny espresso cup and toasted it subtly in Nadia's direction when she looked his way again. She acknowledged it with a polite nod, not reading into the gesture, and continued about her work. Dante found himself intrigued. In a world where so many were either fearful of him or trying to curry favor, Nadia Ferraro was focused purely on doing her job well and treating people decently. That commanded his respect. A sharp snap of fingers pulled Nadia out of the memory and back into the harsh present. Claudio stood in front of her at the service station now. Eyes narrowed, one hand raised from the dramatic snap he'd used to seize her attention. The terrace confrontation had dispersed. A few guests remained finishing meals awkwardly, but most had cleared out, leaving behind a tense quiet and staff members hovering uncertainly. Dante, Nico, and Lorenzo were still nearby. Dante now seated at his usual corner table with a full view of the terrace, Nico hovering behind him like a silent sentry. They appeared to be playing the role of customers, but their vigilance was apparent to Nadia. "Come with me," Claudio hissed under his breath. He jerked his head toward the back hallway. Nadia's stomach nodded, but she followed. She caught a glimpse of Dante's face as she turned. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw an unmistakable message: stay calm. Nadia gave the smallest nod in return. Claudio led her down a narrow corridor toward the storeroom and staff lockers, away from prying eyes. The corridor was dimly lit and lined with shelves holding dry goods and spare linens. As soon as they were out of sight of the dining area, Claudio spun to face her. He didn't raise his voice this time. When he spoke, it was in a low, venomous whisper that echoed off the tiled walls. The sudden quiet danger in his tone was far more frightening than his public bluster had been. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Claudio said, taking a step closer. Nadia instinctively backed up, her shoulders brushing against a rack of clean tablecloths. He crowded into her personal space, but notably did not lay a hand on her. His face was inches from hers, contorted in a smile that didn't hide the malice in his eyes. "Defying me, making me look like a fool out there. That was a mistake, ragazza." Nadia's heart thudded, but she kept her chin up. "If standing up for myself makes me look clever, then maybe I am," she said quietly, refusing to shrink from him. Claudio's nostrils flared. "Drop the act. You're going to regret that little show. I have been very generous with you until now, but if you want to throw it all away, fine." He braced one hand on the wall beside her, caging her in without actually touching her. His voice dropped even further, barely above a breath. "You saw something you shouldn't have." Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. The folder in the office, the key. So this is what it's about, Nadia realized. Not a few supposedly cold plates or minor work infractions. Claudio was afraid of what she glimpsed on his desk. She pressed her lips together, unwilling to give anything away, but her silence only seemed to spur him on. "Don't play dumb," he whispered, the harsh consonants of his Milanese accent slicing each word. "That little peek into my office. Think you're sneaky? I know you noticed the cellar log." Claudio's upper lip twitched when he said it. "You have no idea what you stumbled on. And believe me, you don't want to. It'd be bad for your health, capisci?" A cold weight settled in Nadia's stomach. She had no real clue what was in that log or what Claudio was up to, but his reaction told her it was serious. "I haven't said a word about anything," she answered carefully. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Brava," he sneered softly. "Keep it that way." He let that hang, then continued. "Now listen, your future here is over, we both know that. But how you leave, quietly or in disgrace, that's still up to you." He leaned in, his face a mask of hatred and a touch of desperation. If you make a fuss, if you even think about talking about things that aren't your business, I will personally make sure you never work in Milan again. Actually, not just Milan, Rome, Florence, hell, I'll have you blackballed in every decent restaurant from here to Naples. Nadia felt a quiver in her knees at the sheer spite in his tone. You can't do that, she whispered, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. Oh, I can. You know I can, Claudio hissed. I have contacts. A phone call here, a rumor there about you stealing, and you'll be done. He paused, letting that threat sink in. Then his eyes glinted with a nastier idea. But even that might be merciful compared to what else I could do. He straightened a bit, removing his hand from the wall and dusting off his suit jacket, as if this were a polite chat. Your family, for instance. His voice was almost conversational, but Nadia's blood ran cold. Claudio glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. Your father still struggling with those medical bills down in Calabria? Your little brother, what's his name, Matteo, starting university soon? That's a nice dream. It'd be a shame if the money you send every month suddenly stopped. Or worse, if some unfortunate incident befell the people you love back home. Nadia's hands curled into fists at her sides. A hot, protective anger surged through her fear. How did he know so much about her family? She'd never discussed her personal life at work. Claudio must have dug into her background, perhaps anticipating he might need leverage. Keep my family out of your mouth, Nadia said, her tone low and shaking with barely restrained fury. They have nothing to do with this. Claudio's grin returned, wolfish and triumphant. He knew he'd hit his mark. Then do exactly what I say today, he responded. Otherwise, I'll make sure all those lovely people in your life feel the consequences of your stubbornness. He tugged at his cuffs, adopting a mockingly sympathetic look. You wouldn't want Nonna's house to catch fire because you made a poor decision, would you? Accidents happen all the time. Nadia's vision blurred at the edges from a wave of rage. She trembled, but forced herself to exhale slowly, meeting Claudio's gaze. I'll finish my shift, she said at last, echoing the only option he'd truly given. Just as you asked, and then I'm leaving. She added the last part with a steely whisper, letting him know she had no intention of meeting him beyond today. Good girl, he purred, patting the air as if to calm a skittish horse. You're catching on. Claudio stepped back and smoothed his tie. His eyes were alight with a manic satisfaction. As long as we understand each other, Nadia. Nadia didn't trust herself to speak. She gave a tight nod, swallowing the vile taste of defeat. Inside, her mind was racing. He planned to get rid of her. Frame her, perhaps. All to cover up whatever scheme he was running through Aurelia. But what was happening today of all days? He'd said today. She recalled his words. This is about today's VIP arrival. Something critical was happening soon, and he was desperate to complete it without a hitch, and without her interference. Claudio took a deep breath and exhaled, the menacing confidant replaced by the polished manager mask once more. Time to put on a show, he said briskly. We have an important guest coming, and I need everything to be perfect. He flashed her a final warning look. So keep that pretty smile on and your mouth shut unless you're spoken to. He turned on his heel, shoes squeaking on the tile as he strode out of the corridor. Nadia waited a beat, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. She braced herself on a shelf, sucking in a shaky breath. Through the adrenaline roaring in her ears, she hadn't noticed the subtle scuff of another pair of shoes near the end of the corridor. Around the corner, just out of sight, Dante Morelli stood with his back against the wall, fists clenched at his sides. He had followed like a shadow when Nadia was taken aside. And he'd heard every poisonous word. Dante's face was a granite mask in the gloom, impassive, but for the storm raging in his eyes. Yet he held himself back. He resisted the urge to step in and snap Claudio's neck then and there. Patience, control, let the snake uncoil itself. He reminded himself grimly. Dante knew Claudio was on the verge of making a fatal mistake, and he intended to have proof when it happened. By the time Nadia gathered herself and emerged from the corridor, Dante was gone from the hallway. She saw only the swish of Lorenzo's tailored suit disappearing around the opposite corner, as if the men had never been there at all. Squaring her shoulders, Nadia walked swiftly back toward the terrace. She still needed to collect her bag and clock out, presumably, once that final table was done. But as she stepped onto the terrace, she realized something was very wrong. The remaining staff and even a few customers were all standing in a loose circle near the center of the terrace, murmuring to each other. Claudio was there too, putting on a grave face. In his hand, he held a small velvet pouch. There's been a theft, Claudio was announcing solemnly to those assembled, his voice projecting authority and distress. "And a very valuable item is missing from our safe." He lifted the velvet pouch slightly for emphasis. "This was supposed to contain an heirloom necklace for our VIP guest arriving this evening, a gift from the restaurant, but it's empty now." He turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning faces of staff and the last onlookers alike. Gasps and whispers traveled through the group. Nadia froze at the edge of the gathering, heart thumping. A theft? An heirloom necklace? None of this was something she'd heard of until this instant. Claudio's eyes flicked to her, and in that moment she understood with sickening clarity. This was his plan. Create a crisis, play the benevolent manager wounded by betrayal, and point the finger at the convenient scapegoat, her. Claudio continued, sorrow and anger mingling in his tone with theatrical flair. "It pains me to suspect anyone on my team, but the evidence—" He trailed off and shook his head, as if truly devastated. Then his gaze landed on Nadia and hardened. "Nadia Ferraro," he said, her name cracking like a whip in the silence. Every face turned toward her. Nadia's mouth went dry. She stepped forward slowly. "Yes, sir?" she managed, cursing the slight tremor in her voice. Claudio held up the empty velvet pouch. "You were near my office not long ago," he said, voice heavy with implication. "And you have access to this terrace where the safe is kept in the back room." That was a stretch. She had no such access normally, but reality mattered little now. "Before anyone leaves, I'm going to have staff belongings searched, starting with you." Nadia felt as if she'd been punched. She glanced around at her colleagues. Some looked apologetically away, others stared at her in shock. None dared object. Even the remaining patrons, perhaps 2 tables worth of well-dressed diners who hadn't yet paid their bills, watched in horrified fascination, like they'd stumbled into a live crime drama during dinner. Claudio stepped closer, addressing everyone as much as her. "If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear, Nadia," he said, spreading his hands. "But you must understand, given what's missing, I have no choice." He gestured to one of the busboys who had been hovering uncertainly. "Luca, go fetch Nadia's bag from the staff room." Then he gave Nadia a chilling smile. "We'll just take a quick look, to put any suspicions to rest." Nadia opened her mouth to protest, to insist that if something was missing, they should call the police, or that he had no right to search her personal property without cause. But she bit it back. This was exactly what he wanted, her protesting, making a scene, looking guilty. She could feel Dante's presence at the periphery, his dark silhouette standing by his table, watching intently. She had promised to stay composed, for her family's sake, for her own sake. So Nadia simply nodded and said, "Of course, if you think that's necessary." Claudio seemed almost disappointed by her measured response, but he masked it with a curt nod. The busboy named Luca soon returned, awkwardly carrying Nadia's battered faux leather handbag and the folded tote that held her street clothes. He looked miserable as he handed them to Claudio, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Claudio set Nadia's things on an empty table and unzipped her handbag with a flourish, every movement slow enough to keep all eyes on him. Nadia's hands curled together tightly, her palms were clammy. She silently prayed that whatever trap he'd laid wouldn't actually appear, that maybe this was all a bluff. But deep down she knew better. A collective intake of breath sounded as Claudio reached into an inner pocket of her purse and pulled out a glittering silver chain. Dangling from it was a pendant, presumably the heirloom in question, a heavy teardrop emerald that gleamed even in the soft evening light. It looked obscenely out of place draped over Claudio's fingers. Nadia's heart plummeted to the floor. She had never seen that item before in her life. A surge of indignation and fear washed over her. Before she could say anything, Claudio held the necklace up for all to see. "Well," he said gravely, "would you look at that?" A loud murmur erupted. One of the remaining guests actually gasped, and a server beside Nadia put a hand over her mouth. Nadia felt heat flooding her face. She knew exactly how it looked, as if she had sneaked into the office, stolen the necklace, and stashed it in her own bag like an amateur. I didn't," Nadia began, her voice strangled. Claudio silenced her with a raise of his hand. He turned to the onlookers. "It gives me no pleasure to show you this," he said, sounding genuinely pained. "But I believe in honesty. It appears we've caught the culprit." Nadia's vision blurred with unshed tears of frustration. She couldn't let this stand. She stepped forward, her head high, even as her world seemed to be crumbling. "That necklace is not mine," she said firmly, loudly enough for those around to hear. I have never seen it before. Someone must have planted it. Claudio let out a cold, hollow laugh. Are you accusing me, Nadia? Or one of your colleagues? The very people who trusted you? Nadia's pulse raced. Her mind flashed to the CCTV cameras. She knew the layout of the restaurant well. There were security cameras in the office corridor and likely some covering parts of the terrace, too. If only she could get to the footage. It would prove she never went near the safe or her bag during the time frame in question. In fact, she realized suddenly she hadn't had her bag with her since she started her shift. It had been locked away until Luca fetched it. So how could she have even put that necklace in there while working? There had to be footage of that staff room or the hallway. Summoning courage from sheer desperation, Nadia faced the small crowd and spoke clearly. If you want the truth, she declared, then check the CCTV cameras. They will show exactly who went into the office and when. They'll show if I ever touched that necklace, or even went near where it was kept. For the first time, Claudio's facade faltered. A flicker of alarm crossed his face before he quickly composed himself. He opened his mouth, searching for a retort. One of the diners piped up hesitantly. Yes, a camera would clear things up. No? Others nodded in agreement, some staff as well, emboldened by the logic of Nadia's plea. Claudio's jaw tightened. Unfortunately, he said, raising his voice to talk over the murmurs, the CCTV system has been down today. Technical issues. We can't rely on it. Nadia narrowed her eyes. How convenient. He was preemptively dismissing the one thing that could expose his lie. She shot back. That's strange. It was working this morning. She had seen the little red recording light near the entrance just earlier in the day. Claudio rounded on her, anger darkening his features. Are you questioning me? The system is down. End of story. We'll find out what you did without it. The conviction in his denial rang false to everyone listening. An uneasy tension settled over the group as some of the staff exchanged suspicious glances. It was a small sign. But Nadia sensed Claudio's refusal to check the cameras was as good as an admission of guilt in some eyes. From the corner of the terrace, a slow, deliberate clapping echoed. All heads turned toward the source. Dante Morelli was rising from his seat, giving a solitary, sarcastic applause. His face was composed, but his eyes were locked on Claudio with predatory focus. Claudio scowled, clearly recognizing Dante now as more than just a bystander. Sir, he said sharply, this is a private staff matter. I'll have to ask you to... Who are you to defend staff? Claudio retorted, but there was a slight crack in his voice. He realized he might have just barked up the wrong tree. Dante's approach was unhurried as he stepped fully into the circle. Nico, a silent shadow a few paces behind. Dante's tall frame seemed to tower even over Claudio now, though they were of a height. He looked down at the necklace glinting in Claudio's hand, then at Nadia's stricken face. Her eyes met his. She could see the question in them. Are you all right? She gave the tiniest nod, though nothing felt all right. Turning back to Claudio, Dante spoke quietly, but firmly, each word carrying weight. I suggest, he said, that you be very careful with what you say next. Claudio bristled, trying to salvage his authority. And who exactly are you to involve yourself in our restaurant's business? Nadia's heart leapt into her throat. She realized what Claudio was doing. He was trying to provoke Dante, to draw him into a confrontation. The rival's plan, whatever it was, likely hinged on capturing Dante losing control. And now Claudio, likely emboldened by promises of protection from that unseen puppet master, was playing with fire. Dante tilted his head slightly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just a concerned patron, he said. One who doesn't like seeing good people framed. Claudio scoffed, though sweat was starting to bead at his temple. He gestured to the necklace in his hand. Framed? The evidence is literally in her bag. You saw it yourself. Are you accusing me of planting it, sir? His tone dripped with challenge, and he took one step closer to Dante, as if daring him. Nico moved forward instantly, but Dante lifted a finger ever so slightly, signaling him to hold. Nico stopped, muscles coiled like a spring. Dante and Claudio were now chest to chest, a mere inches apart. Nadia's breath caught. She realized how precarious the moment was. Claudio's whole body was tense, like a rabbit cornered by a wolf, but still foolish enough to bare its teeth. You're trying to provoke me, Dante said softly. There was almost a trace of amusement in his voice, as if he found Claudio's bravado mildly entertaining. Only Nadia noticed Dante's left hand, which hung loosely at his side, and curl into a fist once before releasing. An exercise in self-control. Around them, Nobody dared to move or speak. A waiter who had been inching away froze in place. The air felt thick with impending violence. And yet Dante remained remarkably calm. Nadia could see the confusion on Claudio's face. This was not proceeding according to his plan. Claudio had expected threats, maybe an outburst, something he could show as evidence of the dangerous Mafia boss to whoever was watching. Instead, Dante's composure was impenetrable. Claudio's phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the spell. With a shaky exhale, he leaned back just enough to slip it out and glance at it. Nadia saw him read something, and his eyes widened slightly. In that brief distraction, Dante stepped back, giving Claudio a curt, almost polite distance. Claudio's thumb skated over the phone screen in a quick, hidden motion as he shoved it back into his pocket. Nadia caught a glimpse of his face. It was slick with sweat now, panic creeping in at the edges. He just received some message, and whatever it was ratcheted his anxiety even higher. A realization struck Nadia. Someone else was orchestrating this behind the scenes. Claudio was taking cues from an unseen puppet master. Dante seemed to have caught on as well. His eyes narrowed at Claudio's pocket where the phone disappeared. Behind Dante, Lorenzo subtly cleared his throat, drawing Dante's attention. Lorenzo gave the smallest of nods, and then flicked his gaze toward the rear hall, the direction of the manager's office and security room. Dante's lips pressed into a line. Nadia sensed an unspoken communication pass between them. Dante turned to Claudio one more time. In a voice that could freeze wine, he said, "This ends now. One way or another," he added quietly. "You're not doing this alone." There was an authority in his tone that made even the uninvolved guests shiver. He nodded to Lorenzo. The refined man in the trim suit adjusted his cuffs and headed purposefully towards the restaurant's interior without a word, as if he owned the place. Nadia's heart pounded. She knew Lorenzo as Dante's advisor of sorts. She watched as Lorenzo approached the door that led to the back offices, the door that normally required a staff keycard to open. Without hesitation, Lorenzo reached into his jacket. Instead of a card, he simply pressed a hand against the lock mechanism, and click, the locked door yielded under his touch. Claudio's eyes bulged. How did you?" he sputtered, momentarily forgetting his role. Lorenzo spared him a cool glance. "Management access," he said simply, arching an eyebrow with a faint smirk. It was a bluff. Nadia doubted he had any legitimate access, but he had opened that door as easily as breathing. Perhaps he had some master key or gadget Dante's people provided, or perhaps he'd long ago greased the right palms for emergency situations like this. Whatever the case, to those watching, it looked almost supernatural. A whisper went through the staff. He got in. How? Nadia found herself moving, drawn by the tidal force of whatever would happen next. She joined Dante's side as they all followed Lorenzo through that door. Claudio, recovering from his shock, rushed after them. "Stop!" he barked. "You can't go back there." No one paid him heed. Dante's presence propelled them forward down the narrow back hallway toward the security room. A couple of line cooks peered out from the kitchen, bewildered as this odd parade passed. The owner's stylish advisor leading the way, the waitress everyone had thought guilty, walking beside a man whose mere aura parted the crowd, and the manager bringing up the rear, red-faced and stumbling in protest. They reached the CCTV monitoring room, a small space crammed with screens showing feeds from various cameras, the dining areas, entrances, hallways. It was usually locked, too, but Lorenzo had obviously anticipated that. He was holding the door open, having bypassed this one just as easily. Claudio shoved forward, finally mustering some courage when he saw where they were. "This is off limits," he shouted, voice high with panic. He tried to push in front of Lorenzo to block the monitors, but Dante's arm appeared, barring him with an iron grip across his chest. It was the first time Dante had touched Claudio at all, an almost casual movement, yet it stopped the heavier man dead in his tracks. Claudio let out a stifled grunt as Dante released him. "Check the footage from the last hour on camera 5 and 6, Dante said quietly to Lorenzo. Nadia's stomach flipped. Camera 5 covered the manager's office hallway. Camera 6 was the employee locker area. Of course Dante would know the camera numbers. He had a way of knowing things that others assumed he wouldn't. Lorenzo's fingers flew over the keyboard. Multiple screens flickered through timelines. "Don't you dare!" Claudio yelled, regaining his voice. He lunged toward the desk, hand outstretched to yank the power cord or smash something, anything to stop what was coming. He never made it. Nico intercepted Claudio's wrist midair with lightning speed. The manager struggled, but Nico held him in an unyielding grip, forcing Claudio's arm down to his side. "Don't," Nico said, his first spoken word of the night, delivered almost in a bored tone but with unmistakable menace. Claudio panted, trying and failing to wrench free. Everyone pressed into the small room to see the monitors. Nadia, a few brave staff members, and even one of the lingering patrons had followed as far as the hallway, curiosity overwhelming decorum. The screen blinked, an image playing back in grainy color. The timestamp in the corner showed just 20 minutes ago. It was the camera covering the narrow hall outside the staff locker room. Nadia watched, breath in her throat, as a figure came into view. Claudio. He looked around furtively, then produced something from his pocket, the velvet pouch and necklace, clearly visible even in the low-quality video. The room was deathly silent, save for the electronic hum, as everyone saw Claudio tuck the necklace into a brown leather handbag. Her handbag. Nadia recognized it instantly on the screen. A collective gasp. Someone behind Nadia muttered, "My God." Claudio went limp in Nico's hold, all color draining from his face. "No, that's doctored," he croaked. "That's not real. It's edited." Lorenzo switched to another angle, camera 7 perhaps, showing Claudio leaving the locker room in a hurry, wiping sweat from his brow. The timestamps matched. It was crystal clear what had happened. Nadia felt a dizzying rush of relief and righteous anger. "You planted it," she breathed, staring Claudio down. "You set me up." Claudio's mouth worked soundlessly. For a moment he looked to the doorway, as if considering a dash for it. Nico's hand on his arm tightened subtly, a reminder that running was a very poor idea. Outside the security room, the small group of onlookers began to murmur among themselves. The few who had thought Nadia guilty now looked at Claudio with disgust. The tables had turned completely. All of Claudio's earlier confidence had evaporated like steam. His shirt was visibly damp with sweat. "This doesn't prove anything," Claudio tried weakly. I was investigating, and I found the necklace and was returning it to the safe, yes. "By hiding it in an employee's bag?" one of the servers interrupted incredulously. "Seriously?" Claudio glared at the staffer, but his fury held no power now. He was caught, and he knew it. With a strangled sound, he suddenly whirled on Nadia. "You," he spat, as if conjuring a last scrap of bravado. "You think you're clever? You think this will save you?" Nadia was taken aback by the venom in his voice. "The truth is already out, Claudio," she replied, exhaustion creeping into her tone. "It's over. Over." Claudio gave a bark of near-hysterical laughter. "You have no idea, do you?" He looked around wildly, from Dante to Nadia, to each face in the room. "None of you have any idea what you've stepped into." Dante moved closer to Claudio, who was still held fast by Nico's implacable grip. "Then why don't you enlighten us?" Dante said with icy calm. In that moment, Dante's control was as frightening as any shout. A man about to deliver wrath, but doing so in a soft, almost courteous voice. Claudio's eyes darted to Dante. The facade of the cocky manager was gone. In its place was a very frightened man. His lips trembled, but whether it was from rage or fear was hard to tell. When he spoke next, his voice was unsteady, rising in pitch. "You think I did all this on my own? You think I'd risk everything just to take down some waitress?" He sneered the last word, though his bravado was hollow now. No, I'm not that stupid. I'm not alone in this." Nadia's heart kicked. There it was, the admission. Dante's eyes flashed dangerously. "Who are you working with?" he demanded softly. Claudio clamped his mouth shut. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He shook his head, a slight manic giggle escaping him. "It doesn't matter. I'm finished either way." He shot a glance at Dante that was equal parts hatred and despair. "You've made a powerful enemy, Morelli. He's been waiting for a chance to bring you down." "And now?" Claudio's gaze flickered to Nadia, and a sickly grin twisted his mouth. "Now he knows exactly where to hit you, right where it hurts." Nico gave Claudio a jolt, perhaps as a warning to watch his tongue, but Claudio had the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. He leaned forward as far as Nico's hold allowed, eyes wild and locked onto Dante. "You think this is about a restaurant? About me? Idiot. They'll use her to bring you down." The words hung in the air, sharp as knives. Nadia felt the blood drain from her face. She didn't need it spelled out more clearly than that. She was Dante's weakness. That's what Claudio was saying. Or rather, what the person behind Claudio believed. And now that person had been alerted. Dante's calm mask finally cracked. Something feral flashed across his features as he processed Claudio's threat to Nadia. In a blur, he closed the distance between them. His hand shot out not to strike, but to grab Claudio by the collar. Nico released the man as Dante pinned him against the wall with one forearm. "You listen to me," Dante growled in a voice so low it was nearly a whisper, yet it felt thunderous. Nadia had never seen Dante touch someone in anger before, not like this. "If any harm comes to her..." Dante didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The deadly promise in his eyes was enough. Claudio, face flushed from the pressure on his chest, gave a strangled whimper. "It's not up to me. You know that," he rasped. Dante held him there a moment longer, then slowly let him go. Claudio slumped, coughing and trembling. Behind them, Lorenzo cleared his throat gently. "Sir," he said to Dante in a tone that was both respectful and urgent. Dante knew what he meant. There were still witnesses here, watching his every move, and the real enemy was still out there, not in this room. Dante stepped back. He adjusted his cufflinks calmly, as if nothing had happened, though his eyes remained fixed on Claudio, who was now hunched over, hands on his knees, gasping for breath. The silence in the little room was electric. Finally, one of the cooks broke it by asking timidly, "Should we call the police?" Claudio let out a desperate laugh. "Yes!" he croaked. "Call them! Arrest me! Do whatever you want! It won't change a thing!" He stared straight at Dante as he said this, a hint of malicious satisfaction creeping back into his gaze. "You're as good as dead, Morelli. He'll never let this go. Not after tonight." Nadia found herself moving before thinking. She stepped in front of Dante, interposing herself between him and Claudio's pathetic figure. She wasn't sure if she did it to shield Dante from Claudio's spite, or to shield Claudio from Dante's wrath. "Enough," she said, voice firm. "Claudio, it's over for you. If you have a shred of dignity left, you'll accept that." Claudio slowly straightened, eyes dull. He looked at Nadia with something almost like pity, but twisted. "Over for me? Maybe," he muttered. Then a cruel smirk curled his lips. "But for you, Miss Ferraro, this is just the beginning. You have no idea who your fiancé really is, what kind of war you're about to be caught in." Fiancé. The word rang out, and several people gasped. It had finally clicked for them. Nadia saw the looks of astonishment, some of the staff covering their mouths as they put together the pieces. Dante Morelli wasn't just some benefactor or random mafia boss intervening. He was hers. In the heat of everything, Nadia had almost forgotten that not everyone knew, but there it was, out in the open now. Dante's hand found Nadia's shoulder. He gently drew her back a step, moving to face Claudio himself. The look on Dante's face was no longer furious, it was eerily calm. The eye of a hurricane. "You're done here," Dante said quietly to Claudio. "I'll deal with your powerful friend soon enough, but you," he glanced at the damning paused video still on the monitors, "you get to live with the knowledge that you failed. You tried to ruin an innocent woman, and all you managed was to ruin yourself." Claudio opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing left to say. His shoulders sagged in defeat, though his eyes still burned with spite. Nico finally released his hold entirely, and Claudio just stood there, massaging his wrist where Nico had gripped it. Lorenzo stepped forward. "I've called our friends in law enforcement," he said. "They'll handle him." Nadia had no doubt that by friends, Lorenzo meant either bribed officials or private security on Dante's payroll, who would ensure Claudio was turned over to the police, with all the evidence of his crimes neatly packaged. Possibly they would extract more from him about this mysterious partner before handing him off. Dante's network was efficient like that. At that announcement, Claudio's bravado melted completely. He looked frantically between them. "You can't... Please," he stammered, reaching a hand toward Dante as if for mercy. Dante looked at him with a mixture of contempt and something almost like disappointment. As if Claudio was less a villain now and more a pathetic creature. "Go quietly, and maybe you'll survive to see a prison cell," Dante said softly. Claudio's face crumpled. Two men in dark suits, arriving so swiftly Nadia wondered if they'd been waiting just outside, stepped into the room. They each took one of Claudio's arms. This time he did not struggle. He simply hung his head as they escorted him out. A heavy silence was left behind. Nadia realized her hands were shaking and clasped them together to hide it. Her co-workers, those who remained, were looking at her and Dante with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The truths revealed tonight, Claudio's scheme, the fact that Nadia's fiancé was apparently a man with enough power to unlock doors and call in instant justice, would no doubt be the talk of their lives for years to come. But right now, Nadia didn't want to think about any of them. She turned to Dante. The adrenaline of the confrontation was ebbing, leaving behind exhaustion and the raw sting of the evening's traumas. Dante was already looking at her, his expression gentler now, full of concern. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. just for her ears. Before she could answer, a sudden clapping erupted from the doorway. They all turned to see one of the lingering patrons, the well-dressed stranger who had been watching calmly earlier. He was giving a slow clap, a thin smile on his face. Something about him instantly set Nadia's nerves on edge. The stranger took a few steps forward into the now crowded hall outside the security room and said, "Bravo, what a performance." Nadia frowned. This must be the VIP critic or investor, she thought, the one who Claudio said was arriving around sunset. He was early 40s, slick hair, and a tailored suit that screamed money. His eyes, however, were fixed not on her, but on Dante, and they gleamed with a predatory amusement. Dante's whole posture shifted subtly, becoming guarded. Nico and Lorenzo were instantly on alert too, flanking Dante almost instinctively. It was as if some invisible showdown had just begun between the newcomer and her fiancé. Nadia sensed an undercurrent she didn't fully understand. But from Dante's clenched jaw, she realized who this must be, the rival. The stranger's gaze slid to Nadia and raked over her appraisingly, making her skin crawl. "So this is the famous Nadia Ferraro," he said lightly, as if tasting her name. "I must say, she's even lovelier in person." He gave a shallow bow of his head toward Nadia, mock courteous. Dante moved half a step in front of Nadia, a subtle but clear gesture of protection. His voice remained calm, but there was a lethal edge to it. "You're trespassing on private property," he said to the man, not acknowledging the familiarity. The rival chuckled softly, ignoring the comment. "Dante Morelli, always cleaning up messes. You did well, intervening for your lady love." His accent was local, but tinged with an affected lilt, like someone who had spent time abroad. "I only wish I'd brought popcorn for that little drama." "Thoroughly entertaining," Nico bristled at the man's tone. "You should leave," he warned, stepping forward, but Dante subtly put a hand out to restrain him. The rival tilted his head, looking at Nico with a smirk. "Ah, the loyal dog. Down, boy," he said, entirely fearless. Lorenzo's eyes flashed. "Watch your mouth," he said in a dangerously quiet voice. The rival made a tisk sound. "Everyone's so sensitive tonight." He returned his attention to Dante. "You know why I'm here, Morelli." Dante's reply was ice cold. "If you've hurt any of my people to get here." The rival held up a hand as if in surrender. "Relax. I'm just an investor coming to check on his interests. Isn't that right, Claudio?" He glanced theatrically behind him, then feigned surprise. "Oh, Claudio's indisposed. How unfortunate." Nadia's blood boiled at how glib he was. This man had clearly orchestrated everything that happened tonight. He had tried to use her as a pawn to get to Dante, and he was standing here gloating. She felt Dante's arm gently press her back, a subtle plea for her to stay out of it for now. "You saw what happened," Dante said evenly. "Your man failed. It's over." The rival's smile only widened. "Over? Dante, this was never about a single restaurant manager." He placed his hands in his pockets and rocked back on his heels slightly, looking as casual as if they were discussing the weather. "Consider tonight a declaration of intent, a little message to you, courtesy of me." Silence fell. The rival and Dante locked eyes, and Nadia could almost feel the clash of wills. Finally, the rival sighed dramatically and gave a slight shrug. "Well, I've delivered my message, and I've seen enough for one night. It was a pleasure making your acquaintance, Miss Ferraro," he added, eyes sliding to Nadia once more. "I hope our next meeting is less eventful." Nadia met his stare with defiance, refusing to be intimidated. She said nothing. With that, the rival took a step back and gave Dante a parting nod. "Ciao, Morelli. Enjoy the rest of your evening, while you can." The veiled threat hung in the air like smoke as he turned and walked away, leisurely, as if he hadn't a care in the world. Nico made to follow him, anger etched on his features, but Dante stopped him sharply. "No," Dante said under his breath. "Not here. Not now." Nico looked frustrated but obeyed, falling back. As the rival's footsteps receded, so too did the rigid tension in the air. Dante exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Nadia realized her heart was hammering as if she had run a marathon. She watched Dante exchange looks with Lorenzo and Nico, an unspoken conversation about not taking the bait, about choosing their next steps carefully. Lorenzo adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. "Perhaps we should get Miss Ferraro out of here, Dante." Dante nodded. Agreed. He placed a gentle hand on Nadia's back. The warmth of his touch was grounding in the chaos of the moment. "We're leaving," he said softly to her. Nadia had no objections. As they began to walk, her voice shook with a quiet question. "If I'm with you, am I always a target?" Dante's face was grave in the dim light. "Yes," he answered honestly. She felt drained and exposed, as though every eye was still on her, even though most of the staff had scattered by now to share the news or recover themselves. She realized with a start that tears were threatening behind her eyes, not of sadness, exactly, but the overwhelming swirl of relief and adrenaline crash and fear for what had almost happened. Dante guided her down the back hallway, away from the prying eyes of the dining terrace. Nico and Lorenzo walked ahead to clear the path. They moved as one unit through the service exit into a private back alley where a sleek black car was already waiting, engine purring quietly. The night air of Milan hit Nadia's face, cool and crisp, smelling of city life and a hint of herbed bread from a nearby bakery prepping dough for morning. Only now did she realize the sun had set completely. How long had all this taken? It felt both like an instant and an eternity. Nico opened the rear car door without a word. Lorenzo murmured, "I'll follow in the second car," and slipped away into the shadows, likely to coordinate cleanup or to monitor if the rival lingered. Dante helped Nadia into the car with a protective hand on her head so she didn't bump it. She slid onto the cool leather seat, Dante right behind her. As the door closed and the vehicle pulled away, tinted windows separating them from the world, Nadia's composure finally cracked. Her shoulders started to shake. She pressed a hand over her mouth, but a small sob escaped. It was all too much. Claudio's malicious setup, the threat to her family, the humiliation in front of everyone, and the revelation of the rival who saw her as nothing more than leverage. And through it all, Dante had been there, a steady rock, holding back his fury for her sake. The enormity of it all crashed over her. She felt Dante's arm wrap around her gently. He didn't rush her or shush her. He just held her close, letting her release the pent-up emotion in muffled sobs against his chest. The car navigated through the streets of Milan smoothly, streetlights casting fleeting silver bars of light across Dante's face as he gazed down at her. After a few minutes, Nadia managed to take a deep breath and regain some control. "I'm sorry," she whispered, embarrassed by her outburst. "Don't be," Dante said, his voice a low rumble of reassurance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief, offering it to her. She took it gratefully, dabbing her eyes and taking another steadying breath. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Dante didn't press her to talk, and she was thankful for that. Instead, he gently stroked her shoulder, the simple contact reminding her she wasn't alone. Finally she spoke, voice soft but steady enough now. "You didn't stop it sooner." There was no accusation in her tone, only the hurt that had been hiding under her shock. Nadia lifted her gaze to him. "You saw what he was doing to me back there, Dante. Why didn't you step in earlier?" Dante's dark eyes met hers, filled with regret and something else. Something like pain, because that's what he wanted, Dante answered after a moment. "Claudio and whoever he was working for, they wanted me to lose control. To intervene in the heat of the moment, on camera, in public." He exhaled, jaw tightening as if disgusted by the thought of having played into their plan. "If I had acted too soon, it would have given them exactly what they needed. A show of violence, an excuse for whatever they planned next. I had to wait. To catch him red-handed instead." Nadia absorbed his explanation. It made sense. It aligned with the cunning, methodical side of Dante she knew. Still, the memory of enduring Claudio's humiliation and threats alone, even briefly, cut her deeply. "Do you have any idea how it felt?" she whispered, voice hitching. "To see you there and wonder if you would let him destroy me just for some strategy?" Dante's face crumpled with contrition. He gently took her hand in both of his. "I'm sorry," he said, and she knew how rarely those words left his lips. "Nadia, I hated every second of it, watching him trick her hand in both of his." "I'm sorry," he said, and she knew how rarely those words left his lips. "Nadia, I hated every second of it, watching him treat you that way." His eyes flashed with remembered fury, then he squeezed her hand, bringing himself back to calm. "It took everything in me not to rip him apart on the spot, but I knew if I did, the real mastermind would slip away, and you'd still have that cloud over you. I needed him to incriminate himself, and he did." Nadia closed her eyes a moment, She thought of the video evidence, how clearly it vindicated her, and how Dante's restraint had indeed allowed for that outcome. He was right, but the personal cost. She looked at him again. "I understand," she said quietly. "I do. It's just, when it's you being humiliated and your whole life being torn down in front of everyone, it's hard to be patient." Dante lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a tender kiss to her knuckles. It was an old-fashioned, gentle gesture that never failed to flutter her heart. "You were incredible," he murmured. "I knew you could handle him. You're the strongest person I know, Nadia." Soft voice, steel spine. "You proved that tonight, beyond any doubt." She managed a small smile at hearing the phrase that so perfectly described her, and the fact he remembered it from something she'd once told him her mother said. "Steel melts under enough heat," she said, trying to make it a light joke. But it came out a bit shaky. Dante shifted, cupping her cheek with his free hand. "Not yours," he said. "You bent, but you didn't break, and you never will. Not if I have anything to say about it." They shared a quiet look, the kind that made the rest of the world recede. Nadia saw the raw honesty in his eyes. This man, her fiancé, a person feared by so many, looked at her as if she were something precious and unbreakable at once. She leaned into his hand, resting her cheek fully against his palm. The car slowed to a smooth stop. Nadia realized they had arrived at one of Dante's properties, a discreet, upscale cafe by the canals of Navigli, closed at this late hour. Dante must have instructed the driver to bring them here, away from prying eyes. The driver opened the door for them. Nico had driven separately with Lorenzo, presumably to ensure all was safe. They stood nearby now, keeping a respectful distance by the car, as Dante helped Nadia out. "Take a walk with me," Dante said softly. It was well past twilight, and the narrow canal-side street was quiet, lamps reflecting in the gently rippling water. Nadia nodded. Hand in hand, they strolled along the canal. The night was peaceful, with only the sound of distant laughter from night owls and the lapping of water against stone. Nadia's heels clicked on the cobblestones, but Dante matched her pace easily. For a while, neither spoke. It was enough to simply be together, away from all the chaos. After a few minutes, Dante led her to a wrought-iron bench beneath a street lamp and gestured for her to sit. She did, and he sat beside her, their shoulders touching. Nadia stared down at her hands. Her fingers were still clenched around Dante's white handkerchief, now damp from her tears. She gave a rueful chuckle and tried to hand it back. "I ruined this," she said. He shook his head and closed her fingers back over it. "Keep it. A little mascara never hurt anyone." That drew a genuine small laugh from her, the tension easing. They lapsed into silence again. This time it was Nadia who broke it. "I was so scared tonight," she admitted quietly. "Not of losing the job, or even of Claudio. I was scared that maybe you'd see all this and think I wasn't worth the trouble. That I was a liability." It was hard to voice that insecurity. But after what Claudio and the rival had said, she needed to. Dante's brows drew together in disbelief. "How could you think that?" She shrugged, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Your world. It's dangerous. I knew that, even before tonight. And now, here it is, exploding into mine. If I'm a weakness that your enemies will target, maybe you'd be safer." "Stop," Dante said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Don't even finish that sentence." He turned on the bench to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Nadia, I have many things in my life. Power, money, enemies aplenty. But none of it means a damn thing to me compared to you." He reached up and gently brushed a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Weakness? You are the source of my strength, not a weakness. They only think you make me weak because they have no idea how much stronger I am with you at my side." Nadia's eyes filled again, but this time they were tears of profound gratitude and love. She leaned her forehead against Dante's, and he closed his eyes. They stayed like that for a long moment, two souls finding refuge in each other. A soft buzz interrupted them. Dante's phone. He sighed, pulling back to fish it from his pocket. Nadia could see the caller ID. Rinaldi. Dante answered, and though Nadia could only hear his side, she guessed the gist immediately when he stiffened at the voice on the line. "Rinaldi," he said evenly. She couldn't hear the reply, but Dante's face hardened. The voice on the other end was tinny and harsh enough that a few words escaped the speaker. "Your weakness, public now." Nadia tensed, instantly recognizing the threat. Dante's arm tightened around her protectively. His voice, when he responded, was deadly soft. "Listen carefully, Rinaldi," he said. "Her name is off limits. You or anyone touches Nadia, And there won't be a war, there'll be a funeral. Yours. He hung up without waiting for a response, the finality of the disconnect echoing in the quiet night. Nadia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Was that... Dante nodded. The rival, Marco Rinaldi. His jaw was set like stone. He wanted to make sure I got the message that you're in the crossfire now. Nadia swallowed, absorbing that. It was one thing to suspect, another to hear it confirmed. So it doesn't end here. Dante looked at her with apology and determination woven together. No, not yet. He made a move. Now I'll make mine, but I promise you this. He took her face in his hands. I will keep you safe. Always. Nadia searched his eyes. I know, she said, and she meant it. She had no illusions about the danger, but she also had no doubt in Dante's vow. A cool breeze blew along the canal, ruffling Nadia's hair. She shivered slightly, and Dante pulled her into his warmth. They sat quietly, as the stars glittered above, each lost in their own thoughts of what the future might hold. Finally, Nadia spoke with a gentle firmness. I'm not going anywhere, you know. A small smile touched Dante's lips as he looked down at her. I should hope not. I've grown rather fond of having you around. She nudged him lightly. I mean it. If I'm a target now, so be it. But you and I, we face it together. Partner, remember? Dante's smile widened and he pressed a kiss to her temple. How could I forget? They stood up from the bench, still holding each other. Dante took something out of his pocket, a velvet ring box. Nadia's breath caught. He flicked it open, revealing the engagement ring he'd given her some weeks back. A beautiful solitaire diamond flanked by sapphires. She'd taken to wearing it on a chain at work to keep it safe and discreet, but he must have retrieved it from her things when everything was recovered. Wordlessly, Dante slid the ring from its box and took Nadia's left hand. She felt her heart thumping as he slipped the ring onto her finger where it belonged. We have a wedding to plan, he said, almost casually, as if discussing dinner. Nadia's throat tightened with emotion. She looked at the ring, then up at the man who placed it there. Yes, we do. He leaned down and captured her lips in a tender, lingering kiss. Nadia melted into it, all the fear and stress of the day dissolving, replaced by the steady flame of love that burned between them. When they finally parted, both of them were smiling. Dante rested his forehead against hers. In a voice that was almost a reverent whisper, he said, I will fight the world if I have to. For you, always with respect between us, always with love. Nadia closed her eyes, letting those words imprint on her soul. In that quiet moment by the canal, she believed him wholeheartedly. Whatever storms might come, and they would come, they would face them side by side. As they turned to leave, walking back toward the waiting car and the loyal friends who would ferry them to safety, Nadia glanced up at Dante. To the rest of the world, he might still appear as he always did, composed, formidable, untouchable. He was a Mafia boss to the world, but to her, he was the man who could fight the world and still choose respect.